Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I see that we have a number of participants already here present in the room. We will be using the chat functionality in here. I'll be sure to communicate to some of the panelists who are either tuning in via their iPads, mobiles, or beyond to make sure that they also capture some of the messaging that y'all, the viewers and the audience, will be sending along our way. So I'll be sure to communicate between the panelists, myself, and others. So first and foremost, let me just go ahead and introduce myself and kind of kick off everything. My name is Juan Escalante. I'm happy to moderate this panel on the issue of immigration and what's ahead in 2021. I currently serve as a digital strategist at forward.us. I have been working on immigration-related issues since I was 16 years old. I'm now 31. That puts me around 15 years of doing this work with intense passion and love, and sometimes a big hecticness. But nevertheless, I continue to do it because of my family, of my friends, and a lot of lessons that I picked up along the way. So I'm pleased and honored and happy to be here today. And I'll let some of my panelists give themselves a little bit of an introduction as well. But first and foremost, Ms. Patrice Lawrence, joining us from Docublockorg, and we have Tony Choi joining us from Immigrants Rising. If you guys want to go ahead, Patrice first, then Tony, kind of give yourselves an introduction and tell your audience who you are, where you're calling in from, and you know what mission-driven organization you work for.
Thank you, Juan. Hi, everyone. My name is Patrice Lawrence. I'm calling in from the Washington, D.C. area. I am a member of and co-director, serving in the capacity of co-director for the Undocumented network. We're a network of Black and undocumented folks all across the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony, we're going to pass it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that warm introduction. My name is Tony Choi. My pronouns are he or they. I am the digital director for an immigrants' rights organization called Immigrants Rising in the Bay Area, but I am based in the New York area. I have been involved in the immigrants' rights movement, not as long as Juan, but for quite some time now. And I'm really excited to share the space with Patrice and Juan as well.
Thank you. We can go over pronouns as well. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'll kick it over to Patrice in just a second, but I wanted to kind of just lay, some of the ground rules in here. We'll be discussing some broad subjects in here. We'll be relying on our audience towards the end to kind of queue up questions. I wanted to make sure that I expanded on the idea that immigration is a very broad issue with a lot of components to it. We only have, and I'm looking at the clock here, almost 40 minutes left in this panel. So I want to make sure that we just hit the ground running. And if there's anything that we did not address, we'll be happy to essentially take those questions offline or via email. Again, we're highly engaged on social media as well for those of us who are on Twitter, on Facebook, and Instagram and beyond. Again, feel free to reach out to our organizations and beyond. So first and foremost, again, thank you to my panelists for being here today. The subject of this panel, and it's in the title, is like what lies ahead. But I will be remiss, if we don't talk about some of the happenings on immigration over the past 4 years. Oftentimes, when we talk about immigration in the era of Donald Trump, we obviously, and we don't have to be reminded of this, the media does the work for us. We often talk about the negative, what is essentially impacting our communities, and that's always at the forefront. But I will be, again, I will be remiss if I didn't essentially take a moment to kind of, take a pause and discuss, between Patrice and Tony and myself, some of the potential victories or winnings that we saw over the past 4 years. Now, remember, Donald Trump and Stephen Miller are still in the White House, but nevertheless, there have been some flashpoint moments in this administration's 4-year run where our community has shown up and stood up and essentially declared victories, despite the fact that we live under constant attack of this administration. So Patrice, I'll go ahead and I'll kick it over to you if you want to make sure that you kick us off with this first topic of conversation here.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. So my pronouns are she and her. Mentioning that. So I think if I was to choose, I'll choose two, right? I'll choose two. All right. So one is one victory is for our Liberian DED holders. So DED stands for Deferred Enforced Departure, and it is an executive pardon that's been around for a really long time that basically gives some sort of protection for folks who have it, as well as work permits. And so Liberians in particular have had this for almost 30 years, and there have been a tussle between TPS and DED, and under the Trump administration, it was crushed and killed. And when we were advocating for this in Congress 4 years ago, at the beginning of 4 years ago, many members of Congress did not know what it was, did not know who benefited from it. And the Black women who we took to the Hill, boy, they said, absolutely not. They're going to know who we are today. And so in 2019, December 2019, we were actually able to get it passed. It is now law, a bill, the Liberian Refugee Immigration Fairness Act, that will give citizenship, it gives residency to Liberians all across this country, their spouses and their family members, benefiting up to 10,000 people. That is huge. That's amazing. That's a win in the era of Trump, and just really a testament to Black women finding a way, no matter what. And I think similar to that, really the next accomplishment I'll mention is that Docublockorg has been able to thrive and been able to live during this era. We were formed in 2016, and to be able to deliver an accomplishment like that and so many others, to have space for Black undocumented queer Muslim folks to live, be, breathe, I think, and lead is a huge accomplishment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll hand it over to Tony, and I wanted to make sure that just kind of follow up with some of the stuff that Patrice mentioned. I was able to drop in the chat some resources to make sure that you go along and you take a look at some of the breakdown, not just from Docublockorg's work, but also essentially an explanation about more on what DED does for the immigrant community and how big of an accomplishment this has been. So Tony, I'm being reminded by our moderator in terms of time here, so I want to make sure that we catch up and squeeze in as much as possible. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the victories that you have witnessed throughout this time in the past 4 years of the
So the biggest victory that we witnessed, although it was snatched, was the Supreme Court ruling on DACA. As a DACA recipient myself, it was just a very emotional moment. I remember Juan and I being in like our group chat. We got each other no matter what, just crying and like group texting. So that's one of them, and the other one that I really think of is like the local victory that we were able to have. Immigration policy is more than just a federal policy. It's on state and local basis as well. So, some of the local victories I want to highlight are, because the Democratic majorities were emboldened in places like New Jersey, New York, we were able to get, in-state tuition, financial aid for undocumented students, as well as, driver's license for undocumented drivers as well, despite the heavy reticence from the Democratic establishment in those states. And it's a very key victory because these are the pipelines of how folks get fed into the deportation pipeline.
Absolutely. And I wanted to make sure that I expanded on some of the stuff that we talked about in this particular sense, because, I was personally in Albany, New York, in the freezing cold, arguing and lobbying for the Green Light New York bill, which was signed into law. And it's a huge accomplishment, not just for the state of New York, but also neighboring New Jersey had a similar state policy that was also signed and enacted into law. We saw an expansion in driver's licenses out in Colorado. So, while Patrice, Tony, and I have not exactly spent too much time together, in a singular place, I have very vivid memories of seeing them either on group chats like this one or on the Hill. Particularly Patrice, when we were essentially making lines at the cafeteria to then run to committee meetings and beyond. So it's often it's times like this where, we get to kind of reminisce and connect a little bit about, some of the accomplishments, which is why I wanted to kind of kickstart this panel with something positive before we dive into some of the, realities that confront us today and often that we may see in the year to come. I wanted to kind of let's pivot us immediately into essentially the look ahead, right? We talked about essentially what we've seen in the past 4 years. And I wanted to make sure that the composition of this panel represented a variety of different segments of the immigrant movement and of the immigrant population, because oftentimes, we don't hear enough about different views and perspectives. So I'm happy to see that, we have, unfortunately, we had a fourth panelist who was unable to make it, but nevertheless, I'm happy that Tony and Patrice are here to kind of give their individual perspectives. But in terms of, what should Black, Asian, and Latinx immigrants keep in mind ahead of the presidential election around 2021 in terms of immigration policy? I often, and having lived through a number of these races as long as I've been politically active, I often, hear, this segment of the vote or this segment of the population is going to be crucial in this election, or we're going to recognize this voter bloc for their efforts in here. But when it comes to immigration policy, it's almost, treated as a monolith, or it's often, given entirely in broad strokes, mainly portrayed as a Latino issue more than anything else. So I kind of wanted to essentially start diving into the minutia, the details, and obviously your opinions about what can we look ahead, given that it's 2020, it's a presidential election year, and what should our distinct communities look forward to? I'll switch it around this time. So Tony, I'll kick it to you first.
Oh, that's a multi-pronged question. So I think, what we have to look forward to is, we simply have to reverse a lot of the policies that have harmed our communities over the past 4 years. We have to really take a look and examine what are the policies, how has the criminalization system expanded over under Trump. We have to really deep dive into that and sever those links that have been created between the federal agencies and local agencies coordinating to deport immigrants. We also have to look at the defunding of USCIS. I know that a lot of the focus is on the U.S. Postal Service right now, but another way that the Trump administration is harming immigrants and immigrant voters especially is through the defunding of the USCIS. They're trying to get as little new immigrant voters as possible, and that's one of the key motivators. And also and because of that people will fall through the cracks. And while massively funding vanity projects like the border wall and things like that. So I mean that's something that, although it's not quote the sexy work in terms of visionary work, we have a responsibility to roll those back. And then with that in mind, we should also look beyond in terms of why hasn't comprehensive immigration as a concept worked in the past? What can we do differently? That's different than what we've been doing for the past 20 years in the immigrant rights movement. So looking at how to go beyond the scope of comprehensive immigration reform, and to think of how we can protect the most marginalized in our immigration system.
I'm gonna hand it over to Patrice, and I kind of wanted to reflect back on something that just kind of made me think about what do we have to look forward to. I think on a personal note, we are seeing folks who have been involved in this issue kind of grow up along the lines of how this movement has grown and has continued to be youth led, and we have grown up alongside it. Patrice mentioned that Undocublockorg did not exist, and it was formed, back in 2016, which is, and it has been thriving, which is essentially a testament of how this movement has continued to essentially, expand and grow and learn from itself and from others. And to me, what's exciting and, what we look forward, in this election and beyond is the fact that we have capable, smart, individual people who know essentially, the issue front and backwards to front. who are taking charge of the movement and organizations who are representing, distinct communities, distinct issues, and who are willing to essentially stand up, right, for themselves and for their families and for the loved ones who continue to essentially be victimized and vilified by an immigration system that, does nothing but essentially fight against them day in and day out, and has been completely weaponized under this administration and previous others as well. So I'm pretty excited the fact that we're sharing this space ourselves, that we continue to do our individual work at our own distinct capacities. So if anything else, I look forward to keep working together over the next number of years and making sure that we're able to continue to grow as a movement and continue to fight for, the liberation of our people. So I'll kick it over to Patrice on this particular topic next.
Juan, so well said. You said so many pieces. I don't know where to begin. I think one point that I'll mention, so about what should we keep in mind going ahead, and mentioning the thriving on DocuBlack and the different things that we've been through. I will mention for myself, the experiences that I've had. I was a domestic worker up to the years, actually, in the formative years of Undocuhustle. I was, doing work part-time while still working, taking care of children and cleaning houses, right? As a Black undocumented person, because of what had been denied to me and is continued to be denied to me, right? So the idea that we have been able to carve out space for ourselves and to move forward, I won't forget my experience. When I'm in a room on the Hill in Congress, I remember that experience, right? When we are talking about different bills, and one of the first things that I did when I came on board in 2016 was we did a critique of CIR, and this was actually before Trump was elected. All this, and we did a critique of CIR, and I remember one of the pieces that we were looking at was how much it would cost to actually get citizenship, right? How much monetarily it would cost, as well as how much people would have to prove in order to get any type of paperwork and freedom. And I thought of myself with the experience of working in an underground economy as a domestic worker. Even if that had passed, I wouldn't be able to prove anything. Who am I going to get affidavits from? Where are my checks going to come from? How is that going to work, right? And so the way how immigration reform has looked and the way we categorize things have been essentially to block out poor Black, Latinx, Asian folks who have been disenfranchised twice because they're undocumented, and then because of the color of their skin and their background, right? And so for me, I hope that what folks will keep in mind moving forward, I speak especially to those who are undocumented, is that you keep in mind and remember your own experiences and that of the most marginalized around you, right? So for some folks who, had DACA or probably grew up younger folk, that may have been your parents. For folks like myself, that was me, right? I didn't qualify for DACA, so that was me. I remember a lot of that, right? And then for folks who are older, they have even other stories. And I think it's really important that we continue to carry that with us and carry with us the denial of justice that has happened to us, and that will continue to happen, even if tomorrow they said all 11, you're gonna get citizenship. And nowhere do we see that than the way that this country treats Black people.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think, again, and I posted this ahead, and I should probably do the same for the work that Tony's leading. Again, if you want to take a deeper dive into everything that Patrice just said, I encourage you to take a look at undocublockorg. I know that Tony's also, a newly minted digital director over at Immigrants Rising. And I wanted to make sure that I also kind of give him some time in this panel to talk about the work that they're leading. But, when I hear both of these perspectives, right, from both of you, Tony, who you and I have known each other for quite some time and throughout this movement, I remember working with Patrice during the very early days of Undocublog, and I was at a different capacity and a different organization during those moments in time. I often reflect back of, excuse me, I often reflect back of a lot of the lessons that we inherently have learned, not just as organizers and as people who continue to kind of like lead this movement and push the fight forward, but lessons that we continue to pick up along the way that sometimes were potentially not inherent to us at the time that we were doing. I think that for me, and I'll just kind of kick it off with a personal, example here. I think one of the biggest things that I kind of came up with during the very early stages, and I say this to young advocates or people who want to get involved today, who are not really sure and just have a lot of emotion and a lot of passion for this issue, is that in the beginning, I was a very angry teenager. I was a very angry early 20-year-old. And, one of the biggest things that kind of came down from just life experience, I would say, is that, I had to essentially figure out a way to kind of turn that anger into actual work, and not just essentially consume myself and deprive myself of, feeling that, but how essentially was I able to be proactive about it and act on those feelings as opposed to just essentially holding them all together and let them consume me. So I know that we always talk about taking care of ourselves, about avoiding burnout and making sure that, we're healthy and we're capable, because oftentimes we're the people that are making those swift decisions, whether it's running across Congress or essentially drafting campaign plans. So, I took that and I made a reflection. I promised to myself that I was never going to let myself get so burnt out as I was very early in this journey, that I was never going to be able to see the broader picture and take in new opinions and new challenges and just block it out just by sense of all the anger, all the feelings that I was doing at that point in time. So, Patrice, any lessons, personal movement, organizing wise, that you may have taken, perhaps, under this administration or throughout your journey, in this movement, and how essentially can we apply some of those lessons, into the next chapter of this fight?
I like the self-care one, and I appreciate your background. We see you're taking that self-care thing to heart, Juan. We appreciate it.
I will say I am broadcasting from the middle of nowhere, Maine. I took some time off. I love Netroots, and when I got an opportunity, it's I know you're gonna be on vacation, so can you do this? And I'm absolutely 100%. But I'm also there's a lake looking outside that window, so I'm definitely taking the self-care and centeredness into all heart. So I'm practicing what I'm preaching.
Appreciate it. I've got water on my post behind me. I went to Great Falls 2 weeks ago. That's my self-care. But I think other than that, which is really, really important. So also figuring out how to put that into your day, right? How to make sure that your day does not just go from 8 a.m. to midnight and you're dealing with West Coast folks, East Coast folks, and not sleeping, right? I think another lesson really is always, using your voice and never really giving up. And I know folks say that often, but don't take for granted that the folks who are older than you or who have been doing this for a really long time necessarily know more than you do. That's not necessarily true, right? And it's really important for us to remember that and to read carefully and to have things involved. And never underestimate the possibility of capitalism and white supremacy to continue to reinvent itself. I think don't let your guard down in that way, and to just repeat the same tools that they've always used. Probably relates more to the first question, but one example, for instance, has been the diversity visa program, right? That is always attacked by every administration, Trump, Democrat, you name it. And one of the reasons is the majority of folks who are able to get involved with that are folks who are Black or Asian, folks from African countries or Asian countries, right? And We saw in the CIR, diversity visa, they got rid of it. And now Trump has made huge changes to it. You can't even apply for it without first having a passport, which is very difficult for people to attain. They have reduced how many people can actually apply. They have reduced how many people they actually approve. And I remember being in rooms myself with people who I'd had this discussion with, explained it to them more than once. They said they championed it, and they were still okay with it being let go as a trade for something else. And we had to get really, really mad using that righteous anger one in order to do something about it, right? So being really cautious of the fact that people will continue to abuse you in that way and to abuse things that you care about a lot of times because they don't have the experience with it. So feeling confident to always push and to always be the voice.
Think of something that you just mentioned in terms of like the difficulty of obtaining a passport, and how true that is for some of us that, and people have really no idea. I'm originally from Venezuela. Obtaining a Venezuelan passport may well be as hard, if not harder, than winning the lottery. Namely because the current government does not have any sort of materials to actually manufacture the document. And if you wish to obtain the document, you will have to essentially bribe someone that may know someone in the government and pay them thousands of dollars in exchange for maybe a passport that may or may not arrive to your doorstep. And meanwhile, that kind of cuts both ways in terms of like people here in the United States need a passport because they don't have any other form of ID, especially if you're undocumented from Venezuela. And people back in Venezuela don't have a passport and they can exit the country or can essentially renew or do any sort of, and I think it goes back to some of the original pieces that you mentioned, Patrice, which was, essentially how do we get some of these documentation and what is it going to cost? And for some of the people back home, not being even able to access their own specific type of document given by the government is just a complete atrocity that causes all kinds of ripple effects as well. Tony, any lessons that you can also incumb upon us and share, that you may have, again, learned either in your current role, previous roles, or throughout your journey that we can essentially apply into 2021?
Well, can I just say, I think the passport also resonates with me because, as a Korean male, it's very, very difficult to get a passport, especially if you have not served in the mandatory military service. The Korean government will not issue a passport to you. So I think, part of that is, also having to educate, folks back home about like what our, conditions are like and, what we need from like our home countries too. Be an immigrant who can live their lives in dignity. But I think my biggest takeaway is that that my voice is as valid as anyone else's. Every time I end up in like immigration spaces, this happened for a long time, that I would be the only Asian person in the room. I remember going to like a big conference in 2011. I was an undergrad student in Kentucky back then, and the conference was in Tennessee, but it was supposed to be a national gathering of undocumented young people. And when I went into the room, I was like, there's like maybe like 5 Asians and maybe like 2 Asian undocumented people, including me. And I was like, okay, it's in Tennessee, so they couldn't make it. And at the end of the conference, one of the leaders was going over their plans for 2012 and 2013. And they started, talking, oh yeah, we're only going to engage the immigrant community this time, and we're going to do the entire campaign in Spanish only. I was like, hold up a second. What is going on? Like, what about my community? Like, what are you doing to engage my community? Like, what resources are we using to engage, my community? Because, my community matters. Like, I know folks, I know that, like, I've learned over the years that my, my story is not a unique story. Like, like, as unique as it is, it's a story of, like, hundreds of thousands of Korean Americans. 1 in 7 Asian Americans are undocumented. What are you doing to devote resources for our communities? And I mean, also going back to what, what Patrice was saying, in the CIR negotiation bills for 2013, there was a proposal to include Uniting American Families Act, which was recognizing marriage equality on an immigration basis. And people immediately denounced that as like a poison pill amendment that would tank the immigration bill. I was like, are we, like, are LGBT people like me, are we that toxic, in this discourse? Like, will you not fight for us? Are we not, are we not the most, are we not vulnerable? So I mean, I think over time I've learned that, that this voice is what really matters. The losing that fear of, speaking up when you don't speak up for yourself. I think that was one of the key things, and I think that's it kind of like like coincides with me turning 30 and everything. I think that was like the biggest lesson in my 20s, that my voice matters, and that my voice will it does and has had an impact.
I remember this kind of speaks to our relationship, Tony. Tony and I have known each other for a number of years, and primarily we've done work digitally. But I do remember, I can't quite pinpoint the moment in time, but we were doing, I think it was during one of the DACA announcements, or maybe it was right after that, but we needed to start translating documents into a variety of different languages. And I remember that I would call Tony. I was like, I need a person that knows how to translate in this language, this language, this language, and this language. And Tony would find those people at whatever hours of the night that say, can you translate this one-page document for like the immigrant community, which is exemplary, just given again, some of the pieces that you just highlighted, because oftentimes the barrier wasn't so much that we weren't saying the right things. It's just that we also were not speaking to the right people or meeting them where they were in their own communities, in their own language, and grounding that work, around those numbers and specifics. So, again, to both of you and Patrice, thank you so much for, the work that you have individually done, over your time, in this fight, and that you can continue to do through your administration, through your organizations. We have some time in here, and I want to make sure that I leave some time towards the end for Q&A from the audience, if there are any. Again, a reminder for folks who are watching us or who may have just been tuning in, we are using the chat functionality. So make sure that you leave your comments, your questions, in the chat. I'll be sure to correspond the information over to the panelists. Let's talk a little bit about, the now looking, and forward facing kind of aspect of everything, right? And I just want to get as real as possible, because obviously it is an election year. It's not my first time going through networks during an election year. So there's always a very deep dive into a variety of different topics about political parties, political candidates, a variety of different issues like the one that we're talking about. But right now, we are essentially looking at a presidential contest between two very different individuals in a variety of different reasons, but also who have very different agendas and people backing them. I say that to kind of set up the stage, but also want to make sure that, I'm fair in terms of like contextual things. We have Joe Biden, who is the presumptive Democratic nominee, who has picked Kamala Harris, the former Attorney General of California, daughter of immigrants, on the Democratic ticket. We have Donald Trump, the current sitting president of the United States, and Mike Pence, presumably, that will not change, but weird things have happened in 2020. And as we head into November, we are now seeing essentially glimpses of what both candidates are promising, saying, stating about, their respective administrations, if reelected or elected into the White House, what they plan to do for our communities. I have gone ahead and taken a look at the Biden agenda for the Latino community, as it's been titled. There's a lot of stuff in there, a lot of minutia, a lot of details, a lot of promises that sound great, on paper. And behind all that, my question has always been, is this achievable, in a 4-year term, is this achievable if Congress doesn't flip the way that the current, you know, that the sitting administration expects it to? And, you know, while there's a breadth of information and some of it is extremely good, some of it could be more polished. I kind of want to just kind of go again and have a breakdown as to what exactly, you know, is missing from that agenda. What hasn't, you know, essentially been addressed or has been left out, or what essentially hasn't been expanded broadly enough, you know, from your individual perspectives, and what will be your message to the candidate if, you know, they were watching right now. I think the other, and I know this is like a multi-pronged question, but I want to make sure that I just kind of give it the full breadth and scope. One, Joe Biden, former vice president of the Barack Obama administration, record number of deportations, and, you know, essentially tasked, you know, with building the deportation machine that Donald Trump inherited. Kamala Harris, attorney general, prosecutor, you know, quite some record in terms of, you know, and Tony touched about this very early on our conversation in terms of the intersection of criminal justice and immigration, or crimmigration. You know, what do we make of all this? What do we make of the agenda? What do we make of the Biden-Harris ticket? Does Kamala Harris bring a new element into the mix? Does she not? You know, are their records too heavy to then, you know, for them to be essentially brought out and unpacked, you know, right here, right then? So I just wanted to kind of get very real in terms of, like, you know, what's at stake for our community, giving a lot of the horrors that we have already seen and continue to witness under this administration, under the Trump and Pence administration. So I'll kick it over to you, Patrice, first, and then we can go to Tony.
Thank you. I think one, you know, and this will never get old, I think, which is the criminalization of immigrants. And we say it a lot. I think it's come to the fore a lot with the recent George Floyd protests and the moment that we're in, where a lot of folks just got the wake-up call, and I'm grateful, better to get the wake-up call now than never, about policing, about how folks are criminalized just because of where they're from and being Black and all that. And I think that regardless of who wins, and with even a Biden-Kamala ticket, we will definitely have that problem. And I think Biden has actually come out and said that. He has said that he will continue to fund policing. He's not in favor of defunding it. And so that worries me, right? That worries me a lot about the fights that we're gonna have. And regardless of how the makeup of the Senate or the House looks, like this same Congress here, we were able to get the Dream and Promise Act passed, and we had a fight when it came to criminalization, right? And this was a fight from people who are supposed to be on our side, but it has been embedded, this idea of who is deserving, who is not, who is good, who is bad, and not really about justice and dignity for all. And so I think it's really important that that the candidates start to embrace something like that, and to embrace the complexity of what it means to be immigrant, to be Black, right? And my hope is that Kamala will come into, Senator Harris will come into that as her own as well. I acknowledge that in the Senate, she has done a lot of work for immigration. She has helped even on Docublockorg itself with the Black Mauritanian work. Juan, you remember that, right? And she did that work for us, and we're so grateful at a time when no one else would mention it. And I also acknowledge that our Black brothers and sisters as well in California have told us about the atrocities that they have had at her hands as well. And so I think it's complicated and it's complex, but it's important to honor both. And my hope for someone who is going to represent this country and represent a country I'm from, I'm Jamaican, is that they acknowledge and they know the complexities and the truth. And then they move forward in such a way that they don't cause harm to others and people whose lineage they're from.
On the Mauritanian issue, this is essentially a work that you know, I was fortunate to be part of, and much needed, given essentially, the complexities of that segment of the immigrant population and, some of the challenges that they were facing. And I think it also gives, again, a glimpse of to like how the scope of this is much larger than people realize, that it's not just like one population or one voting bloc versus the other, but rather, it's not just Latino, Asian, Black issue, but rather it encompasses so many other dimensions and so many other realities that sometimes don't even get the airtime that it deserves on national TV, while we're out there fighting for the reality for people's lives and livelihood. So again, thank you for that, and thank you for that opinion. Tony, I've been the moderator is telling me we have 15 minutes left. I promised folks here some Q&A time. We have around 5 minutes. I want to make sure that we still have time in here for further reflection. Tell me your thoughts. Again, Biden, Harris, what's missing, what's not missing, what we'd like to see. You have also been a veteran of campaigns and has seen, essentially what gets printed on paper and, what comes into reality. What do you have to say on this?
So, I mean, I echo, what you and Patrice had to say on, Biden and Harris's records. I mean, Biden, the architect of the crime bill in the 90s, Kamala Harris, top cop of San Francisco, and, refused life-saving care to trans people as AG of California. I mean, however, we really have to think, I see the movement as, we're shifting targets. This is not sustainable for our communities to continue fighting Donald Trump and blatant white supremacy at the top level. So, that is our current choice right now. And I mean, we're just shifting our target to someone who we see as more movable. And, I got to work on the presidential primary as well. And it was an uphill battle, especially to include language around healthcare for undocumented immigrants. But after crying in front of policy people on our team, about my own family struggles with healthcare, with the talking about the growing need, in terms of healthcare for immigrant workers who we treat so expendably, as we're seeing through the COVID-19 crisis. We know that immigrant communities deserve healthcare no matter what, because healthcare is a fundamental human right. So that's what I have to add to that conversation. And I also looked at the API policy as well, just as Juan looked at the Latinx policy. And I have to say, one thing that's key and missing is expediting the wait time for families to join together. Family-based immigration is one of the biggest ways for Asian American communities to really immigrate to the United States. And for 4 out of 5 countries with the longest visa wait times, they're Asian countries: the Philippines, Vietnam, China, and India. And we know that that this is racist as hell. People having to wait quarter centuries just to be able to live with their family members here in the United States. So I don't see that, but I mean that's something that we could definitely push the Biden Harris administration to do. And I'll leave you with this story. In the winter of 2017, early 2018, I quit my job and I raised $10,000 to lobby full time to try to include the DREAM Act in the continuing resolution to fund the government, because that was what I saw as the best chance for me to find legalization. And again, one of the trips I got to meet Senator Harris in the Hart Senate building lobby. We were surrounded by I think hundreds of other dreamers as well. And I went up to her. I told her, I know that your mom was a single Asian immigrant mom who did breast cancer research. That probably saved my single Asian mom's life. My mom is a breast cancer survivor. So I want you to do everything in your power to make her dreams come true. And she said that, that she would. And, and I told her that I will hold her to account no matter what office that she is in. And I'm continuing to keep my own promise about, of keeping her accountable for that promise that we made in the Hart Senate building lobby.
Thanks for that, Tony. Pushing against time, in a few words, Tony, what can we expect of immigrant rising in 2021?
So we actually have a very exciting project on the line. So, COVID-19 has stricken, immigrant communities really, harshly. A lot of us are, if we're not, like quote unquote essential workers, we're in the service industry, and the service industry has, hit us really hard. And one project that we've launched is called Undocuhustle, which is an entrepreneurship learning hub. It's also, it's great because Asian American and like African immigrants tend to be one of the largest entrepreneurial segments in the United States, and so that's an opportunity for income generation within our communities to really build that economic resilience that that we really need in this time, that will not be affected by labor laws that discriminate against immigrants on their status. So go to undocuhustle.org, and we will be having a demonstration day to show the community how it'll be used. So if you're interested, please send me a message. Back to you, Juan.
Wonderful. There is a question in here, and we're running against time. Patrice, on DocuBlack, you continue to grow, you continue to build influence, and you continue to shake things up in DC. What can we expect in 2021?
I think you can expect that we are going to fight. No matter who becomes president, no matter what is going on, we're going to fight federal, local, state level, and we will continue to make sure that our leaders are blazing trails and building their own tables and bringing the chair. We will be sure that that's what it looks like, and that when we talk about justice, we're talking about justice for all people, and that folks continue to put that in, and that means justice for healthcare, justice for TPS, DACA, DED, older folks, younger folks, and our ability to thrive in the United States. On DocuBlock on all platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Please follow, share, and also sign up for updates on our website.
Making sure that I drop the links in here. There is a question on the queue, and I want to make sure that I respect our moderators' time because I know that they have to rush to the next session. There's a question about how invested we are on MPP, or the Migrant Protection Protocols. I can essentially go ahead and just tell you really quickly that, number one, immigrantsrising.org, on docublock.org/us. We left it in the chat. Follow us for updates. I can personally attest that we have been either involved in some personal capacity or within our organizational capacity as some of the atrocities that our communities continue to face out there in the border, specifically families who are essentially stuck at the border or who continue to face the cruelty of the MPP program. So I can tell you from personal experience, Forward has committed resources and individuals to essentially help communities at the local level lead. We personally believe that people who are essentially at the border and who work with these communities day in and day out are essentially the best equipped and the most knowledgeable to continue to do so. And we'll continue to do that work on an individual basis. So again, thank you so much, for your question here, Carmen. And I'm sure that, again, if you take a look at our website, there's more breakdown information. I will give it to our panelists in here, but again, time is pressing. So moderator, thank you so much for your time. For those of you who attended our panel, there's 22 people, 5 of us are in here, 17 attendees. Thank you so much for your time. Look forward to having this conversation fully online. Again, on docublock.org, immigrantsrising.org, on docuhustle.org, and forward.us. And I look forward to having those conversations through the internet. Connect with us, chat with us, ask us your questions. So Patrice, Tony, thank you so much for your time. Moderator, thank you so much for leading us in here. And I look forward for the rest of Netroots here.
Thank you for a fabulous job, Juan.
Thank you all so much. Keep up the fight.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.